The bass shook the entire floor, the lights flickered endlessly over the sea of bodies below, and Nathan Carter was supposed to be focused on a business meeting on contracts, signatures, and the handshake that would reshape the underground flow of money throughout the city of Chicago. That was before he saw her. From the highest VIP balcony of the nightclub, where he could oversee everything like a king looking down on his kingdom, his gaze was pulled sharply toward a single point in the chaotic crowd. She was standing there, right at the center of the dance floor, between two girlfriends, laughing with such warmth that even the lights seemed to shift with the change in her expression. Her dress was a shade of deep red, hugging the soft curves of her body, glittering with sequins every time she turned or even moved the slightest bit. Her chestnut hair, cut to her shoulders, lifted gently as she tilted her head, laughing toward her friends, revealing a slender neck and pale, luminous shoulders. Nathan had no idea when he stopped listening. Behind him, the conversation continued: numbers, profit percentages, territorial divisions, offshore accounts, everything spoken in the familiar language of the underworld he ruled. But it all became distant background noise the moment he saw her. He leaned forward slightly, bracing one hand against the glass railing, his eyes following every movement of the woman in the shimmering red dress, as if he were hypnotized. She had no idea he existed, not a single discreet glance, not even the subtle caution he often saw in women who realized they were being watched by Nathan Carter, the man whose name was whispered through every back alley of Chicago. And that was precisely what made him unable to look away. It was not overt allure. It was her indifference. There was something strange about it. In a world where everything bent to his control, from money and covert politics to the fear in other men's eyes, this woman stood there, needing nothing from him, knowing nothing about him, laughing as though his name had never existed in her universe. Nathan lost track of the last part of the negotiation happening behind him. Ryan, his close assistant, cast him a quick glance before effortlessly taking over the remainder of the deal, discreet yet completely understanding. Nathan had made powerful men tremble with a single look, yet now, his gaze was locked onto a woman dancing under colored lights, a woman who had unknowingly pulled him out of his own world. And if you are listening to this and feel something stir inside your heart, take a moment to subscribe to our channel, like and share this video so we have the motivation to continue creating heartfelt stories every day. And if you don't mind, may I ask where you are watching from? Leave a comment below and tell us which corner of the world this story has reached. We cherish every word you share. Nathan stayed at the railing long after the negotiation ended. Handshakes, nods, and polite wishes for success replayed behind him like an old tape in a closed room, but none of it held his attention. Ryan quietly wrapped things up, signed on his behalf, and saw the partners out as if it were routine, requiring no instruction. They had worked together long enough to know that when Nathan fell into that sudden silence, the only sensible response was not to ask anything. Nathan's eyes never left the woman in the red dress. She danced freely, not trying to attract anyone, not performing. Sometimes she paused to take a sip of water from the glass her friend held out, then burst into laughter again, brushing her fingers through her hair as though the world consisted only of music and the people she cared about. That effortless ease hit Nathan in the chest. He was not used to being held in place by something that was not part of his plan. Encounters, relationships, even flings, everything in his life was arranged, controlled, kept within limits he set. But this time, he knew that in only a few minutes of watching from above, something inside him had shifted. He lifted the half-full glass of whiskey from the table, drank it down in one motion, then set it back with a soft, barely audible click. Ryan heard it, though. He always did. A decision had been made. Nathan turned away, straightened the lapel of his suit, and walked out of the VIP area, heading directly toward the main floor. His steps were steady, slow enough not to draw attention, yet firm with purpose. Ryan followed at a respectful distance, alert but not interfering. The club's security parted instantly when they saw him approaching. No one dared stop him, not even with a glance. The air on the ground floor felt entirely different, thick with sweat, perfume, alcohol, and cigarette smoke all blending into a heavy haze. But Nathan didn't care. He moved through the crowd, his gaze fixed on the glimmering red dress at the center of the dance floor. As he drew closer, his heartbeat quickened, not from nerves, but from a pull he couldn't name. Ava turned at that exact moment. Their eyes met for a fleeting instant. No recognition, no hesitation, just the brief, passing glance of a stranger in the crowd. Then she looked away, returning to her conversation as though nothing at all had happened. Nathan stayed where he was, tilting his head slightly as if trying to read the meaning behind her expression, but she had already blended back into the flashing lights and pulsing music as if she had never seen him. A woman who could look directly at him without flinching, without admiration, without curiosity, without disdain, simply without care. A strange electric sensation ran down his spine. Ryan leaned in slightly and murmured near his ear, "Do you want me to look into her?" Nathan didn't answer immediately. He watched her for a few more seconds and slowly shook his head. "No, not yet." Ryan nodded and stepped back, leaving Nathan alone in the crowd where he, a man accustomed to controlling every outcome, was realizing he had stepped into a game no longer in his hands. And that was exactly why he could not walk away. Nathan did not rush. He remained still for a moment, watching her. The girl in the red dress continued talking with her friends, sometimes shrugging her shoulders when she laughed, sometimes tilting her head thoughtfully, fully immersed in the music and the moment, never once trying to captivate anyone around her. She was not the type who came to a place like this seeking attention. No flirtatious glances, no inviting gestures, no signs she was waiting for someone to approach. Every movement of hers felt natural, almost private. Nathan approached carefully, not too close, keeping a respectful distance so he wouldn't startle her. He waited until there was a small pause in her conversation, then spoke gently, his voice deep and steady but not overbearing. "I'm sorry if I'm interrupting. I just wanted to say your dress is beautiful." Ava turned to him. Her gaze was unhurried, not startled. Her brown eyes studied him just long enough to notice that he was not some random man trying to flirt. She gave a small nod, a faint smile forming at the corner of her lips. "Thank you." A short, simple response, neither cold nor inviting. Nathan sensed the boundary immediately, yet felt drawn in rather than pushed back. He held her gaze without pressing or probing. "My name is Nathan. I saw you from upstairs. I thought, maybe I should at least say hello once." Ava tilted her head slightly, as if weighing his words. Nathan noticed there was no hint of fear in her eyes, no unease, none of the flustered reactions he often saw in women who met him. She listened, but she did not step closer. She remained perfectly still, fingers wrapped around her glass, her gaze steady but not offering anything more. "Ava." "Nice to meet you, Nathan." Her voice was soft, each syllable measured, as though she were quietly examining how she truly felt about speaking to him. That stirred something in him, a feeling not of disappointment, but of challenge. Not the desire to conquer, but the desire to understand a world she was quietly guarding. He didn't ask anything else about her. He didn't ask if she was here alone, where she lived, what she did for a living, or whether she came here often. Questions like that would only ruin the fragile balance, especially with a woman who clearly wasn't here to seek anything from this crowd. Instead, Nathan simply stood beside her, letting a brief silence settle between them before offering a small, gentle smile. "If I'm making you uncomfortable, I'll leave right away." Ava took a moment before responding. "No, you're not bothering me. It's just, I'm not very good at conversations in places like this. I'm here to relax with my friends, that's all." Her tone wasn't cold and not annoyed, but clear, a boundary placed with grace, neither hurting him nor giving him any path to push further. Nathan nodded slowly. "I understand." The words were not a retreat, but an acknowledgement of something he sensed he had no right to step into. Ava turned back to her friends, continuing her conversation without rushing away or pretending to be busy, but without prolonging any interaction with him. She wasn't indifferent, but she wasn't inviting. She kept him exactly where he had entered her evening. A polite stranger, nothing more. Nathan stayed a few seconds longer, making sure he wasn't imagining her calm dismissal. Then he dipped his head gently, his expression composed. "Have a good evening, Ava." She offered him a soft smile. "You too, Nathan." And then she turned away, the lights shimmering over her red dress once more, while Nathan stepped back from the dance floor, his mind oddly blank yet his chest echoing with something entirely new. Not because she was cold, but because she had no need to be warm. Nathan did not leave the dance floor right away. He moved slowly through the crowd, pretending to make his way back to the VIP area, but in truth he simply wanted to look at her once more from a different angle. Ava was still talking with her friends, sometimes shrugging her shoulders as she let out a soft laugh, still holding a glass of plain water, no cocktails, no hard liquor. She was the exact opposite of the frenetic atmosphere around her, like a single quiet note lingering in the middle of a pounding song. Nathan had met countless women in his life, from magazine cover models to influential politicians, yet none had ever made him feel gently pushed out of their world the way she just did. He wondered what this feeling was. It was not painful rejection. It was a distance she kept with perfect grace, not close enough to touch, not far enough to forget. When he reached the VIP level, Ryan was already waiting. He didn't ask anything, only glanced at Nathan's expression before handing him a fresh drink. But Nathan shook his head. He stood in silence for a moment, looked down at the dance floor once more, then turned to Ryan as if remembering something. "Prepare 2 cocktails for me, but only bring out 1. Ryan raised an eyebrow, then nodded. 2 minutes later, Nathan returned to the ground floor holding a single cocktail in his hand. He did not push himself into Ava's group of friends. Instead, he stood slightly to the side, just close enough for her to see him. When her eyes met his, he lifted the cocktail a little, a wordless invitation. Ava glanced at the drink in his hand, then at her own glass of water. She gave a small smile, stepped half a pace closer, just enough to speak without shouting over the music. "I don't drink alcohol when I'm out with my girlfriends. You should keep that for yourself." Her voice carried no sharpness and no rudeness. It was simply the truth. Another boundary, quietly placed. Nathan froze for the briefest moment. No one refused him that way. No one turned down a courteous offer from the most powerful man in the city and still managed to look utterly serene. He let out a soft, amused breath, not wounded, but intrigued by how effortlessly he had been pushed out of the pattern he was used to. "I understand. Then allow me to drink alone and watch you smile a little longer?" Ava shook her head, still smiling. "You're being very polite, Nathan. But I'm not looking for anything tonight beyond my friends and a few good songs." Nathan nodded, lifting the cocktail to his lips, but the bitter sweetness was nothing compared to the strange sensation spreading through his chest. Something alive. It had been a long time since he had felt truly engaged in a conversation with someone who needed nothing from him. No curiosity, no eagerness, no retreat, no advance. She simply stood there present, complete, at ease. Ava tilted her head slightly, signaling that the conversation was coming to an end. "I should get back to my friends. Thank you for the offer, and for being kind. Have a good evening." Nathan watched her walk away unhurried, unforced, unburdened, and he knew he would remember this moment, even though nothing remarkable had happened. A cocktail untouched, a refusal that left no wound, and yet it left a mark clearer than anything he had ever possessed. For the first time, a woman wanted nothing from Nathan Carter, and for the first time, that made him want more than anything else. The city at night remained restless, as if it never slept, but in the quiet of the top floor of the tower overlooking the Chicago River, Nathan Carter sat alone before the massive glass window, watching the lines of car lights streaming endlessly below. The whiskey in his hand had grown thin and cold, the ice nearly melted, yet he had not taken a single sip since pouring it. His mind kept returning to the vision of the woman in the glittering red dress standing in the middle of that chaotic crowd. Ava Collins. Even though she never said her last name, it had etched itself into his mind the moment she turned away without looking back. Ryan stepped into the room, handing him the final contract that needed his signature for the day, but his gaze lingered on the unusual stillness in Nathan's expression. Nathan signed without looking, pushed the folder back, and turned again toward the city below. "Who is she?" Ryan asked, his tone casual, as though discussing a new billboard on Michigan Avenue. Nathan didn't answer right away. After a moment, he spoke quietly, as if afraid his voice might break something fragile in his thoughts. "Just someone I met at the club. It's nothing." Ryan nodded, then stepped a little closer. "Do you want me to find out who she is? I can have the full file within an hour." Nathan shook his head, eyes still on the city. "Not yet." Ryan asked nothing more. He knew exactly when not to pry. He slipped out of the room like a shadow, leaving Nathan alone with the strange emptiness in his mind. Nathan leaned back in his chair, closed his eyes. He tried to sort through what he was feeling, but every thought circled back to the same image, Ava beneath the flashing lights, turning her head to laugh with her friends, her bright eyes never once looking at him, and her gentle refusal soft as a touch without force, yet strong enough to unsettle him. He had met hundreds of women, encountered every kind of approach from shy to bold, from passionate to calculated, but no one had ever entered his life by refusing him at the door, and that refusal, instead of pushing him away, left him unable to stop thinking about her. He knew almost nothing about her, only her name, Ava, and the smile that had made the whole club seem briefly silent. No occupation, no address, no trace. An ordinary woman who could occupy the mind of a man who once controlled an entire underworld network so intensely that he now sat for hours staring into the night, doing absolutely nothing. He told himself it was a passing feeling, a moment amplified by the strangeness she stirred inside him. He insisted that tomorrow, when he returned to his busy schedule with deals, numbers, and decisions that could cost a man his life, Her name would fade like a fleeting memory from a restless night. But when he lay down in bed, the ceiling reflecting the warm glow of the lights overhead, Ava appeared more vividly than before. Not because of her beauty, but because of her distance. Because of the way she wanted nothing from him, left him nothing except an ache he couldn't quite name, and that ache reminded him that he was still human. Not a man who commanded and controlled, not a cold symbol of power, but a man who had forgotten what it felt like to genuinely want to know someone. That night, Nathan didn't sleep. He lay in the vast, suffocating quiet of his penthouse, eyes open in the dark, and for the first time in years, he allowed a woman to enter his mind without knocking. 2 nights later, Nathan returned to the club with no appointment, no negotiation to conduct, no real reason to be there except a vague pull he refused to define. Ryan didn't ask. He simply drove him to the same place, parked in the private basement, and vanished the way he always did. Nathan walked directly to the VIP level but did not enter his usual room. Instead, he stood near the railing, holding a glass of water instead of alcohol, eyes sweeping across the dance floor as if searching for something hidden in the swirl of lights below. He didn't have to search long. Ava arrived soon after, accompanied by the same 2 friends. They were not dressed to stand out, not heavily made up, and nothing about them suggested they were seeking attention. Ava wore a simple black dress, her hair pulled up, her smile just as radiant as he remembered. She didn't look up, unaware that above her, a pair of eyes watched her every movement with near absolute focus. Nathan didn't go down right away. He simply observed, wondering what version of her he would see tonight, whether she remembered the conversation from before, or if all of it already belonged only to him. An hour later, the dance floor grew more crowded, thick with the smell of sweat and alcohol, the music pulsing against the ribs. Ava and her friends remained near the center, laughing, chatting, moving lightly to the music but never too wildly. Nathan had just taken a sip of water when he noticed a stranger approaching Ava from behind. The man was tall, his shirt unbuttoned at the top, his steps slightly uneven from too much alcohol. At first it was only a few words, but then he reached out and placed a hand on Ava's waist in a way that crossed every boundary. Ava turned, stepped back, said something Nathan couldn't hear, but her reaction made it clear she was uncomfortable. The man didn't back off. He moved closer, trying to hold her wrist even as she pulled away. Nathan didn't think. He set his glass down, stepped out of the VIP area, and took less than 10 seconds to reach the floor. He pushed through the crowd with sharp precision, his eyes never leaving Ava as she tried to free herself. When he reached them, Nathan said nothing. He placed a hand on the man's shoulder, just enough force to make him turn, not enough to attract the crowd's attention. The man stumbled half a step, frowning at the stranger interrupting him. But before he could speak, Nathan's gaze delivered the message for him. Cold, cutting, permitting no argument. The man froze, then yanked his hand away from Ava and disappeared into the crowd without a word. Ava stepped back another pace, staring at Nathan, her eyes wide with surprise. She said nothing, but her expression showed she hadn't decided yet whether to be grateful or annoyed by his sudden appearance. Nathan stepped back slightly, giving her space. "I wasn't following you. I just happened to see what was happening." His voice did not apologize, but it held a softness unusual for him, as though he understood that his presence was not welcome. Ava stayed silent for a few seconds. She exhaled, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, glanced across the dance floor, then looked back at him. "Thank you, but you didn't need to step in. I could handle it." Nathan nodded. He didn't argue. "I know, but I still couldn't stand still." Ava watched him for a moment longer, then turned back to her friends without another word. Nathan remained in the crowd for a moment, surrounded by the smell of alcohol and the roar of music, yet his mind was completely silent. She remembered him, or at least she recognized him. But it was not the look of someone eager to see him. It was the look of someone not ready. And Nathan understood that from the moment she stepped back half a pace, he had moved closer, and also farther away. Nathan did not leave the club right after Ava turned away. He stepped back, standing among the shifting bodies on the dance floor, his eyes still following her from a distance, no longer with possession or curiosity, only with a quiet trace of regret. He knew he had intervened, and he knew that for someone like Ava, personal boundaries were sacred. He had stepped inside them without being invited. Nearly an hour later, when Ava's group left the club, Nathan walked out as well, keeping just enough distance so she wouldn't feel watched. Outside, the night air was cool, and the city lights shimmered on the mist-dampened pavement. Ava stood with her two friends waiting for a car, laughing now and then, yet a faint tension still lingered in her eyes. Nathan approached slowly and deliberately, his hands tucked into the pockets of his coat, his gaze steady but not overwhelming. He stopped a few steps away, waiting for her to turn and notice him before speaking. "I'm sorry for making you uncomfortable earlier." His voice was low, nearly swallowed by the passing traffic, but Ava heard him clearly. She looked at him, not avoiding, but also not responding immediately. Nathan continued, "I didn't mean to make you feel watched or pressured. I just saw what happened and reacted." Ava stayed silent for a moment, then she gave a small nod. "I know. I was just surprised. I didn't expect to see you again." Nathan let out a soft smile, not hiding the truth. "I didn't expect to see you again either. But I don't regret it." This time, Ava tilted her head slightly, and the cautious look in her eyes softened. Nathan looked straight at her. No detours. "If you don't mind, I'd like to buy you a cup of coffee. Not now, another time. A public place, bright, no loud music, no alcohol, no surprises, just a conversation. You can say no." He added the last sentence as a reminder that the choice was entirely hers. Ava lightly pressed her lower lip between her teeth, studying him as if weighing not only the invitation but the man himself. She didn't rush to answer. Nathan didn't push. He simply waited, as if time at that moment belonged only to the two of them. At last, Ava gave a small nod. "1 cup of coffee. In a public place. But only if I choose where." Nathan nodded immediately. "Of course. You choose the day, the time, the place. I just need to know so I won't be late." She smiled soft, uncertain, touched by something fleeting he couldn't quite name. "All right, I'll text you." Then she returned to her friends and stepped into the car without looking back. Nathan stayed there long after the vehicle had pulled away, as if holding on to the lingering breath of their conversation. He had no number for her, nothing in his hands except a fragile promise. But for the first time in many years, that was enough. No power, no orchestration, no persuasion, just waiting. And Nathan knew he would wait. 3 days later, on a sunny morning that was bright without being harsh, Nathan sat alone in the corner of a small cafe north of Lincoln Park, far from the noise of the city and with nothing glamorous about it. The place had a warm, old brick charm, soft lighting, and the scent of pastries and freshly roasted coffee drifting in the air. Ava chose this place, and Nathan arrived 15 minutes early, not out of fear of being late, but because he wanted everything to be right. When Ava walked in, she wore a beige crewneck sweater and simple jeans, minimal makeup, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked no different from the other women in the cafe, but Nathan's eyes settled on her instantly. He stood as she approached, greeting her with a nod instead of a grand gesture, then motioned to the chair across from him. Ava sat, slipped off her light scarf, set her bag beside her, and smiled. There was still a hint of guardedness in her eyes, but no coldness this time. She ordered a cappuccino. He ordered an espresso. They began with small talk about the weather, the neighborhood, the croissants in the display case that looked delicious but a little dry. No flirting, no intrusive questions. Nathan spoke little, but every word was clear, never strained to impress. He mentioned once living on the East Coast, then moving to Chicago because everything here suited the way I prefer to live. Ava didn't ask what that meant. She simply nodded and answered with a short story about the time she did freelance work in New York while still in school. Slowly, their conversation flowed like a quiet stream. No interruptions, no competition. Nathan spoke about liking to wake up early and disliking late-night meetings, a strange confession for a man rumored to operate only after dark. Ava laughed. Truly laughed. For the first time that morning, and Nathan realized that her genuine smile was different from the ones he had seen under the club lights. It was soft, unguarded, and real enough to loosen something tight in his chest. He didn't say much about his work, only that he stood behind a few things that ran quietly in the city. Ava didn't press further, didn't question him, simply studied him for a moment as though measuring the space between what he said and what he didn't, then shifted to telling him about a book she had recently read whose main character carried a secret everywhere he went. That led them to deeper questions. What is trust? When should a person be honest? If someone carries darkness within them, should they ever reveal it? Nathan sat still for a moment before answering, then said quietly that sometimes staying silent was the only way to protect people from the parts of oneself that might harm them. Ava didn't reply, but something in her gaze shifted. She began to see that he was not like the men she had known, Not because he was powerful or impeccably dressed, but because he wasn't trying to make her believe in some softened version of himself. He left everything open. No direction, no pressure. When they stepped out of the cafe after more than an hour, Nathan held the door for her, didn't ask for her number, didn't push for another meeting. He only said one gentle sentence as they paused on the sidewalk. "Thank you for not saying no." Ava looked at him, her eyes no longer guarded, only quiet with a trace of confusion. Then she nodded softly. "Thank you for keeping your word." And for the first time, Nathan felt he didn't need to control anything to receive something precious. All he had to do was sit there, listen, and let her open the door herself. But Nathan had made a miscalculation. He believed that by meeting her in a quiet cafe, far from his territory, he could keep her safe within the shadows. He was wrong. In his world, predators do not need weeks to find a weakness. They only need a single moment of hesitation. The night at the club, when he stepped down from his VIP tower to protect her, he had unknowingly placed a target on her back. His enemies had been watching ever since, waiting for just one more sign to confirm that she mattered, and the coffee date was that sign. The next morning, before sunlight had fully filtered through the trees lining Ava's street, she picked up her phone to check her work emails, as she always did, and saw a message from an unknown number. No name, no greeting, just one line on her screen that made her breath catch. "We saw him save you at the club. Being his favorite comes with a price. Walk away while you can." No exclamation point, no threat, but chillingly clear. Ava stared at the message, her heartbeat thudding hard in her chest. She had told no one about meeting Nathan except her two closest friends, and they were people she trusted without question. Where had the message come from? Who knew she had met him? And why send it now, just when something between them had barely begun to take shape? She set the phone on the table, walked a slow circuit around her apartment, trying to breathe, trying to understand, trying to think with reason instead of instinct. But instinct spoke first. Something was wrong. She had felt a faint unease ever since the first night she met Nathan, from the moment their eyes met, from the way he seemed to step out of the shadows without effort, commanding attention without asking for it. There were too many things about him that were unclear. The way he deflected questions about his work, the way he avoided specifics, the way he appeared exactly when needed, as though everything around him existed within a sphere he quietly controlled. And now, this message from a stranger pushed every quiet doubt into sharp focus. Ava didn't reply to it. She didn't call Nathan either. She needed time. But for the rest of the day, she couldn't focus on anything. The same questions circled endlessly through her mind. Who is he? What is he hiding? And is she placing her trust in a man she does not truly know? That evening, when her phone vibrated with a call from Nathan, she stared at the screen for a long moment before answering. His voice was steady, warm, unhurried. "Are you all right? I was busy today, but I kept thinking about our coffee yesterday." Ava stayed silent for a few seconds. Then she drew in a slow breath. "I got a message. From a number I don't know." Nathan didn't ask what it said. He let a quiet beat of silence pass, then spoke. "What did it say?" "A warning to stay away from you." She didn't need to explain further. Nathan understood. His voice dropped, calm but heavy. "I'm not surprised," and that alone unsettled Ava more than the message itself. "So you knew something like this could happen. Why?" "Because there are people who do not want you anywhere near my world, and they will do anything to make you doubt, pull back, or turn around." Ava rose from her chair, walked to the window, looking down at the dim, quiet street. "So, should I doubt you?" Nathan answered after a long pause. "You have every right to, and I won't stop you if you choose to walk away." His answer made her turn back toward the phone. He didn't try to persuade her. He didn't beg for her trust. He didn't attempt to refute the warning. He left the decision entirely in her hands. And paradoxically, that lack of control unsettled her even more. "I don't know what to believe. I don't know who you are." Nathan was silent. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower, but steady. "I am not a good man, but I have never intended to hurt you. If you feel you need to walk away, I won't stop you. But if you still want to understand, I'm willing to let you ask anything, and I'll answer everything." Ava said nothing more. She ended the call after a soft, brief goodbye, as though nothing meaningful had ever passed between them. But in her heart, something new had opened. She was afraid, but she could not turn away, not after glimpsing the faint light behind the heavy curtain of a man the whole world warned her to avoid. 3 days after their last conversation, just when Ava thought everything might finally return to normal, Something happened that made it impossible for her to keep pretending she was still safe. Early that morning, when she opened her door to leave for work, she noticed something strange carved right across the surface of her apartment door. In the weak hallway light, 3 jagged letters stood out sharply against the brown paint. Ava. Someone had used something sharp, a knife, perhaps, or a nail, to scratch her name into the wood. The cuts were deep, violent, and unmistakably threatening. A cold tremor ran down Ava's spine. She didn't scream, didn't panic, but her fingers clenched around her keys so tightly they left marks on her skin. No one in the building knew her well enough to do this. No one, except someone who had a reason to remind her she was being watched, and she knew this was no longer just about text messages. She called the police, but aside from filing a report and promising to review the hallway cameras, there was nothing more they could do. No one had seen a stranger. No one had heard a sound. Ava returned to her apartment with a sense of violation that seeped into her bones. She closed all the curtains, locked both deadbolts, and still could not find calm. That night, for the first time in years, she could not sleep in her own home. The next day, when Nathan called, she hadn't planned to answer, but she did. She didn't need to explain much. He heard the change in her voice and knew. When Ava described everything that had happened, Nathan was silent for several long minutes. Then he spoke, his voice low, steady, and carrying no trace of uncertainty. "You cannot stay there another night. Pack only what you need. I'm sending a car for you." Ava frowned, sitting upright as if someone had tried to make a decision for her. "No, I'm not moving just because someone wants to scare me. And you cannot decide for me." Nathan did not lose his composure. He didn't argue. But what he said next made every layer of Ava's defenses tremble. "This is no longer a warning. It's a sign. And if you don't act, the next person in danger might be you." For the first time, Ava heard something in his voice she had never heard before. Not control, not power, but helplessness mixed with fear. After a long silence, she exhaled, "I'll come. But only temporarily." Nathan didn't say anything else. He simply sent an address and added one final message. "The door will be open, top floor, private elevator." Ava arrived at his penthouse in the late afternoon. No one asked for ID, no guards, no staff. The building was tall, elegant, quiet like a separate world removed from the city outside. When the elevator doors slid open, she stepped into a wide, airy space so still she could hear her own heartbeat. Nathan was waiting in the living room, wearing a simple white shirt, holding a cup of tea. He didn't walk toward her or reach out. He only looked at her and nodded, a greeting without words. "Thank you for letting me stay," she said, just to break the silence. Nathan nodded. "You can stay in any room you want. Every door is open. And if you don't feel safe being alone here, I'll come home early every night." Ava raised a brow. "I don't need a guardian. I just need quiet. And boundaries. No intrusion. No personal questions. No expectations." Nathan didn't smile, but his eyes softened. He understood, and he agreed. Ava walked into the first room on the right. She set her suitcase on the cool wooden floor, sat on the bed, and exhaled. She had no idea what she was doing. But in that moment, in that unfamiliar yet peacefully still space, she felt perhaps for the first time that she was being protected without being controlled. A thin boundary had been drawn, and both of them stood on their respective sides, respecting it, at least for now. Her first night in the penthouse passed with a quiet she had not expected. She had imagined every awkward scenario, every feeling of being watched, but none of it happened. After a simple dinner, she prepared herself in a kitchen far too modern for her minimalist habits. Ava returned to her room and locked the door gently, not out of fear, but because she still needed her own space. But she left the bedside lamp on, a thin sliver of light, like a sign that she hadn't shut the door completely. Nathan didn't knock, didn't hover, didn't attempt anything that would break the boundary. He only sent a short message before going to sleep, telling her he'd be in the next room if she needed anything, and if not, he would remain completely silent. Ava read the message, set her phone on the nightstand, then lay on a mattress softer than anything she was used to. The pillows smelled clean. The faint glow from the city filtered through the curtains just enough to cast quiet shadows on the walls. She didn't fall asleep right away, but she didn't feel heavy either. There was something strange about knowing that the man the entire city feared was on the other side of that wall, and yet she lay in his home untouched, uncoerced, unjudged, simply left alone. It had been a very long time since Ava felt the true meaning of respect. Not calculated gallantry, not kindness with conditions, but the kind of presence that stayed in its place, as if Nathan understood that the one thing she needed most was not closeness but space. A space wide enough to breathe. The next morning, when Ava stepped out of her room with her hair still tousled and her bare feet on the cool wooden floor, she found Nathan sitting at the dining table, holding a book instead of his phone, with a pot of coffee already brewed, and 2 simple ceramic mugs beside it. He didn't look up immediately when she entered. He didn't rush to speak. He simply poured coffee into one mug, slid it toward the opposite seat, and then met her eyes. His expression soft enough to feel like a whisper. "Did you sleep well?" he asked, his low voice careful, as if not wanting to break the fragile calm in the morning kitchen. Ava nodded, sat down, and wrapped her hands around the warm cup. She didn't know how to describe it, but this quiet steadiness made her feel like a stranger to her own constant fear. She didn't ask whether he slept well. She didn't try to act grateful, but she didn't avoid his gaze anymore. And Nathan, with all the power he wielded everywhere else, sat still and did not take a single step forward without permission. They said little that morning, sharing only the subtle sounds of stirring coffee and the faint breeze brushing against the tall windows. Ava knew this was its own kind of test, a way for both of them to exist beside each other without harm, without intrusion, without crossing lines. And for the first time, she felt safe, not because of the double locks or the building's security system, but because the man sitting across from her chose not to claim anything that wasn't his. She didn't know how long that would last. But that morning, when she lifted the mug he had poured for her, Ava knew she had stepped into something entirely different from anything she had ever known. And strangely, it did not make her want to run. The rooftop of the building was a place Nathan rarely shared with anyone, but that evening, he opened the door and led Ava up, carrying 2 cups of warm tea and a thin blanket. The city stretched below them, its lights scattered like fallen stars. A soft breeze swept through, stirring Ava's hair, while Nathan quietly watched the glow on her face, features he had seen many times, yet still could not fully understand. They sat side by side on a wooden bench, the blanket draped over both of them, neither speaking for the first few minutes. Ava looked up at the sky, where only a few stars managed to shine through the city's brightness. Nathan watched her instead, openly, without apology, as if his gaze was the only truth he dared reveal. "Do you come up here often?" Ava asked, her voice as light as the breeze. "Not often, but when I need quiet, this is the only place where I can hear myself." Ava nodded, tightening her hands around the warm cup. "I understand. I need places like that too." After a moment of silence, she turned to him. "You hold everything so tightly, don't you? As if you let go of even a little, everything would fall apart." Nathan didn't answer right away. He looked toward the distant skyline, where tall buildings dissolved into the night. "Maybe, but with you, I don't feel the need to hold on so tightly." His words were soft, not meant to impress, but heavy enough to settle deep in her chest. Ava didn't respond, but her eyes met his without retreat or defense, acknowledging a distance that had quietly shortened. Nathan set his cup down on the wooden floor, turned slightly toward her. The night breeze rustled his shirt, but his gaze stayed steady, calm. "Ava." His voice was low, quiet. He leaned in a little, not too close, never urgent, just enough for the question to land between them with clarity and gentleness. "May I kiss you?" Ava looked at him, unblinking. In that moment she felt as though she stood at the edge of something familiar and something entirely new. She heard no music, felt no cinematic rush of heartbeat, only a stillness so deep she could hear her own breath. She nodded, just once, very softly, and Nathan leaned in, the last bit of distance disappearing in a shared breath. Their lips met, not hurried, not claiming only a tender touch, as if both were testing each other's trust with the most fragile gesture they had. No whispered promises, no hands pulling closer, no blaze of passion, just a kiss sincere enough to make the rest of the world fall away for an instant. When they parted, their eyes remained fixed in the same quiet space between them. Ava didn't smile, but her lips were softer. Nathan said nothing more. He didn't have to. The kiss had already spoken for both of them. And for Ava, for the first time in years, she felt no need to guard herself, no need to hold the line. She understood that what had just happened wasn't a sudden turning point, but the natural result of every quiet moment built on respect, patience, and something even harder to name. Maybe acceptance, maybe trust, or perhaps the beginning of something truly important. The message arrived the next morning, just as Nathan was standing alone in the kitchen brewing coffee while Ava was still in her room, her sleep not yet settled after the rooftop night that lingered in both memory and breath. His phone lit up with a single line from an unsaved number. No photo attached, no explanation. Tell her who you are, nothing more, nothing needed. Nathan stared at the words, as if each letter were burning through the careful shell he had worn for so many years. They came slowly, steadily, each time more pointed than the last, and this one was no longer a vague warning, it was an order. A final push forcing him to choose between continuing to hide or letting the truth rise into the light. He deleted the message immediately, but his eyes remained fixed on the darkened screen. When Ava stepped out of her room with her hair tied up, wearing a thin sweater and jeans, she noticed instantly that the silence in the kitchen was unlike all the mornings before. Nathan did not look up when she spoke. He handed her a cup of coffee, but his gaze drifted past her as if he were somewhere else entirely, caught in a memory she had never been allowed to enter. She held the cup, sat down, and studied him for several seconds before she asked, "Are you okay?" Nathan nodded, but offered no words. Ava inhaled slowly. She was not the type to push too soon, but she was not naive enough to miss when something had shifted. And whatever it wasn't only in his eyes. It was in the air, in the sudden space between two people who had kissed only the night before. "Is something wrong? Or did someone message you?" Only then did Nathan lift his gaze. His eyes were not cold, yet they were not easily reachable as they had been before. He stayed silent for a few seconds, then answered quietly, "Nothing you need to worry about." But Ava set her cup down, her voice firmer now. "No. I do need to know. If I'm here, if I have stepped even 1 foot into your world, then I have the right to know what I'm stepping into. I'm not stupid. I've known something was off from the beginning. The messages, the scratched door, and the way you always stay silent whenever I ask about your work." Nathan tightened his hand on the table, not violently, just enough to show the restraint beneath his stillness. He looked at her as if measuring how far she was willing to go. Then he spoke. "Are you sure you want to know? Because once you do, you will never see me the same way again." Ava exhaled softly, her voice steady rather than angry. "I don't see you the way I see other people, and I've never asked you to be perfect. I just want the truth. And if you think I can't handle it, then maybe you've never really understood me." Nathan stood, walked to the glass door leading to the balcony, and stood there for a long moment as if gathering whatever courage he had left. His back remained turned when he finally spoke, his voice low in the pale early winter light. "I don't work in finance. I don't work in media. I don't have an office. What I run is the network behind the city's clean walls. I move unmarked money, unseen information. I am the man people refer to in small conversations, with glances, not words." Ava remained still, her heartbeat quiet but heavy. Part of her had suspected, part of her had prepared, but hearing it spoken aloud changed the weight of everything. She rose slowly, stepped closer, stopping just short of touching him. "So it's all true? The rumors, the control, everything?" Nathan turned back to her, his eyes unflinching. "All of it. But you need to know one thing. I have never used any of it to pressure you, not once." Ava nodded, her gaze unwavering. "I know. But I need time." Nathan nodded too, making no attempt to bargain. He said only one sentence, more honest than anything he had ever spoken before. "I'm not afraid of being seen for who I am. I'm afraid of losing the chance to become someone better because of you." Ava did not answer, but in her eyes, a shadow gathered like the first sign of a coming storm, and both of them knew the real turbulence was only beginning. Ava walked slowly across the cool wooden floor toward the balcony where Nathan still stood, his broad shoulders slightly lowered as if burdened by the weight of the truth he had just released. She heard nothing but the wind threading through the doorframe, the steady pulse in her chest, and the thick silence draped over them like an invisible blanket. The scattered fragments in her mind began to connect every detail she had noticed, every instinctive feeling, every glance, every moment he had stayed quiet when he should have spoken. Nothing was vague anymore. Nathan was not just powerful or mysterious. He was the man standing behind the machinery of the entire city. A system no one named but everyone knew existed. A world running parallel to the law, yet free of its control. A gray domain where money, influence, and information were the only true currencies. Ava turned away, needing air, needing space to stay upright. She did not scream or accuse. She simply closed her eyes and let the chaotic tide of thoughts crash against one another. Nathan did not follow. He remained exactly where he was, watching her without reaching out, without offering comfort or excuses. He knew no words could soften the weight of what had been revealed. Ava opened her eyes and looked at him. There was no suspicion left, but something new had formed an invisible distance, fragile but real. How long have you been doing this? Her voice was roughened. Almost my entire adult life. I was raised in it, and then one day, I became the one who held the reins. No titles, no medal on my chest, but everything passes through me. She nodded slowly, as though rewriting his portrait inside her mind. You never hid that you weren't ordinary, but I never imagined how deep it went. Nathan closed his eyes for a brief moment, as if accepting a blade he always knew would come. I don't expect you to understand. I just want you to know that even in that darkness, I have never touched anything that would make me unable to meet your eyes. Ava studied him, then turned back inside and sat at the edge of the sofa, her hands clasped together. The world felt as though it tilted slightly, not because of who he was, but because every feeling she had ever allowed herself to have for him now felt delicate. Not wrong, just fragile. I don't know what to do with this information. I'm not afraid of you. I'm afraid of myself. Afraid that some part of me still wants to stay, even though I know I shouldn't. Nathan stepped inside slowly but stopped several feet away. He did not take the seat beside her, did not touch her hand. He spoke softly. You can leave, right now. No one will stop you. No one will watch you. You will be safe, and I will never appear in your life again if that's what you want. Ava looked up, her eyes bright but dry. I don't want to leave, but I can't stay as if nothing has happened either. I need time. Nathan nodded. However long you need, I'll wait. She rose, walked toward the hallway leading to her room. Her steps were steady, but each one felt like stepping across water. When the door closed quietly behind her, Nathan let out a long, heavy breath, as though he had crossed a threshold in his own life as well. And Ava, standing in the dark of her room without turning on the light, stared at her reflection in the mirror, seeing for the first time the eyes of a woman trying to understand how her heart could tremble for an entire world she had once believed was nothing but corruption. And she knew, from that moment on, her choices would never again be simple matters of right or wrong. They would be trades, and she needed time to decide whether she was willing to pay the cost if she chose to stay. 3 days after Ava asked for time and quietly withdrew from nearly all contact, Nathan kept his word. He did not text, he did not knock on her door, he did not try to persuade her. He did exactly what she needed. He kept his distance while remaining present. During that time, Ryan worked quietly in the background, without needing explicit orders. He already understood Nathan wanted to know who had sent the anonymous messages and who was behind the threat carved into Ava's door. Within 48 hours, every trace led to a single name. Martin Vega, longtime private driver of Donovan Greer, a man from an old network whom Nathan had pushed out of the circle of power more than a year ago. Martin was not intelligent, but he was absolutely loyal. He had acted without being told, believing he was protecting the world from a man like Nathan. He stood still for a long moment, his expression neither angry nor surprised. What he felt, if it could be named, was a cold exhaustion. Ryan waited, expecting Nathan to give the usual order, a single nod, and Vega would disappear from Chicago's map overnight. No one asking questions, no one finding anything. But Nathan only exhaled once, short and certain. Call the lawyer, and call Detective Roy. Ryan looked up. You mean, hand him over? Nathan nodded. Do it by the book. Do we have enough to make it stick? Nathan asked, his voice cutting through the silence. Ryan placed a photo on the desk, a grainy surveillance shot taken just an hour ago. We have the messages, but that's civil court territory. This, however, is criminal. Martin is parked 3 blocks from here, watching the building, and our intel confirms he has an unregistered firearm in his glove box. He's escalating, Nathan. He's waiting for her to come out. Nathan's eyes darkened, a flash of cold fury passing through them before settling back into resolve. Good. Call Detective Roy. Tell him there is an armed suspect stalking a civilian at that location. Give him the license plate and the exact model of the gun. Ryan still did not fully understand. What about Donovan? This is his man. You know he'll never take responsibility. Nathan looked straight at him, his eyes no longer those of the city's shadowed ruler but of a man choosing to stand at the edge of his own boundaries. He does not need to. We do not need to prove anything. We just need to do the right thing. Ryan fell silent. He had never seen Nathan choose this path, not because he doubted him, but because it went against the way their world operated. Bringing an underground problem into the light meant stripping away the immunity Nathan had built his entire life upon. But he also knew the reason behind this shift was not the law. It was the woman in the next room who remained silent only because she still was not sure she could trust the world he lived in. 2 hours later, flashing red and blue lights cut through the night. Martin Vega was pulled from his car by a swarm of officers before he even realized he had been made. They found the loaded weapon exactly where the anonymous tip said it would be. He was handcuffed and shoved into a cruiser, shouting threats that no one listened to. Newspapers did not run the story, but the underground world trembled. It wasn't just that Nathan used the police, it was the precision. He knew exactly where his enemy was, and exactly what he was carrying. He had turned the law into his own personal weapon, and that frightened more people than any silent retaliation ever could. When Ava saw the brief internal news summary that played by chance on the living room television, she turned, looking at Nathan for the first time in days. He stood behind her without speaking, but something in her eyes shifted. "You did that?" she asked. Nathan nodded. "Not because I fear the law, but because I do not want you to think you belong to a world without boundaries." She watched him for a long moment. The fear in her eyes had not vanished, but something else had appeared, a fragile trust being rebuilt piece by piece. And he knew a choice that looked weak on the surface was sometimes the strongest proof of change. He no longer chose vengeance. He chose the law, not for himself, but to keep the one thing he could not bear to lose. Ava. Ava sat on the long sofa in the living room, her gaze fixed on the television that had been off for some time. The news she had seen moments earlier kept replaying in her mind. Martin Vega, the man who sent the threatening messages, had been arrested, not by hidden forces, not by a quiet disappearance in the night, not by an invisible hand forcing him out of town, but by the police, by the law, by real people in real uniforms upholding justice in daylight. She knew who had made that decision. She knew the man who had always chosen cold efficiency and ruthless silence had chosen a different path. Because of her, when Nathan entered the room, the late afternoon light brushed his shoulders, and Ava turned toward him as though seeing him under a completely new brightness. He did not speak. He did not need to. She set her tea down and stepped closer, stopping half a step away. "I thought nothing about you could surprise me anymore, but today, I was surprised." He looked at her with an expression stripped of defense and stripped of power. Just a man trying to hold on to what was still good inside him. "I thought you would handle it the old way," she said softly. "Quick, quiet, without a trace. But you didn't." Nathan nodded, his voice low but steady. "I thought about it. Honestly, my first instinct was still to give the order. But then I remembered the way you looked at me that day. The look caught somewhere between trust and a boundary. And I knew that if I kept living the old way, I would not deserve your hesitation." Ava's gaze deepened, her heart softening but tightening with a feeling she could not yet name. Not admiration, something deeper, steadier. The beginning of faith. "Was it because of me?" she asked, her voice like a small gust of wind. Nathan did not hesitate. "Because of you. Because of the way you said you needed time. Because for the first time in my life, I want someone to see all of me and still stay. I don't want fear or respect anymore. I want trust." His words were a confession less about power and more about the emptiness he had carried behind the perfect facade of a man who controlled an entire city. Ava stepped the final distance between them, her fingers brushing his hand, her eyes stripped of all defense. "I thought I would need more time. But today, seeing what you chose, I know you're changing. Not completely, not in a day, but truly, and I can't turn my back on that." Nathan closed his hand around hers, holding gently, as though it was the most precious thing he had ever been given. "I can't promise to be the best man in the world, but I can promise that each day, I will try not to make you regret staying." Ava smiled a quiet, soft smile, and in her eyes, doubt no longer lingered. Only a beginning remained, a beginning that would not be easy, but would be real. And that, to her, was all that mattered. Ava moved into Nathan's penthouse on a cool weekend afternoon, the sky clear as though hinting at something new unfolding. She came not because she feared more threats, not because she needed protection as before, but because her trust had grown deep enough for her to choose this space on her own, a space once shadowed but now gently brightened by the light of his change. Her small suitcases were placed neatly against the wall, just a few clothes, a few books, and a little framed photograph she set on the bedside table. She did not need to carry her whole old life with her. What she was beginning here was not an intrusion, but a merging slow, deliberate, and entirely her choice. Nathan did not make a speech or plan a celebration. He simply opened the door, took the bag from her hands, set it on the table, and gave her a single nod, their eyes meeting long enough to acknowledge that from this moment on, they were no longer two people from two worlds. The first days passed slowly and gently. Ava still left for work on time each morning, wearing her neat clothes, tying her hair, carrying her familiar coffee thermos, But unlike before, when she returned home, she did not step into a small apartment filled only with warm light and silence. She came home, and Nathan was there, not with power or cold authority, but with an apron slung awkwardly around his waist, tasting the sauce he was learning to cook from a video he kept replaying. The first time Ava saw him fumbling with the pot nearly boiling over, she froze in surprise before laughter escaped her, a sound bright enough to warm the entire penthouse more than any fireplace could. Nathan looked up, shrugged sheepishly like a boy caught doing something clumsy, then murmured a line she would remember for years. "I'm learning because I want you to eat something that isn't just delivery." She stepped beside him, lowered the heat, stirred the pot, her movements sliding naturally into the space between them, as though it had always been meant for her. Their evenings became like that, moments where the food mattered less than the simple fact they were together in a kitchen. Far too luxurious for such ordinary acts, yet warm enough for a love forming slowly from everyday gestures. Nathan learned to wake earlier to make coffee for her, and Ava learned to stop herself from opening her laptop at night so she could sit beside him watching old movies. Sometimes they sat for hours in silence, each with a book, but the quiet never felt heavy. It was the stillness of two people learning to breathe in rhythm. Ava never pried about the secret meetings, the encrypted messages, or the nights he had to leave suddenly. She knew which boundaries should not be crossed. Nathan never intruded on her work or her personal space. He simply left a warm towel outside her bathroom door when she came home late, or played soft music in the early morning, so she would wake to something gentler than an alarm. These small things, one by one, wove themselves into a new routine. Neither of them realized they were building. No contracts were signed, no eternal promises made. Only one thing bound them: the choice to stay. And each day, when Ava walked through the penthouse door, Nathan still looked at her the way he had on the first day, not with possession, but with the gaze of a man who once held everything yet now wanted only one thing. Not through power, but through trust. And for Ava, that was enough to stay. On a December evening when the cold settled faster than usual, and the wind slipped through the thick window seams of the high-rise penthouse, the kitchen light cast a warm golden glow across the familiar space. Nathan stood at the sink, his hands moving steadily through soapy water, while Ava sat behind him on a bar stool, slowly turning a half-empty glass of red wine between her fingers. She watched him quietly, feeling something inside her that was soft but unsettled, like a lingering note that refused to fade after a song had ended. It had been several weeks since she moved in with him, weeks in which their lives had fallen into a natural rhythm, as if the distance that once existed between them had never been there at all. Yet that very peace stirred a gentle unease inside her, a sense that if she didn't speak now, something beautiful might slip past her without a name. Nathan turned, dried his hands on a kitchen towel, and refilled her glass, the simple gesture wrapped in quiet care, just as he had done every evening lately. When Ava looked up, her gaze held him with a steady clarity that made him understand she was about to say something different tonight. She set her glass down, laced her fingers together, and spoke with a voice low but unwavering. I love you." There was no prelude, no metaphor, no careful lead, and just a truth lifted straight from her heart and placed between them. Nathan froze for half a second, then his eyes softened, as if this was not an answer he needed to consider but one he had been quietly waiting for, unsure only of when it would come. He pulled a chair beside her, sat down, and held her gaze as though memorizing every shift in her expression. "I knew," he said gently, "from the moment you told me no." Ava frowned slightly, not understanding. Nathan's smile was quiet and deep. "When you turned down my first invitation, when you didn't want anything from me, weren't impressed by power, didn't get swept into the world I came from. The way you stood firm in a place designed to shake people, it made me realize that if you ever said yes to me, it would come from something real, and nothing could be more valuable than that." Ava felt her heartbeat quicken, relief more than emotion, as though a tension she didn't recognize had finally loosened. She had been afraid she said it too soon, afraid she was falling for a man the world warned her not to trust. Yet Nathan had been the one dismantling those fears, piece by piece, with a patience and clarity she never expected from him. He took her hands gently into his. "If we go forward," he murmured, "I want only one thing, no secrets, no pressure. Even the smallest truth deserves daylight. I've lived behind masks for too long. I don't want that between us." Ava nodded. "I want the same. No pretty words, no grand gestures, just honesty even when it's hard." They sat together in silence, but it was no longer a silence filled with uncertainty. It felt like steadiness, like two people finally walking in the same direction, even if the path ahead held its twists. She leaned her head against his shoulder, and he wrapped an arm around her as if shielding her from everything unsteady beyond their walls. Nothing more needed to be said that night. From that moment on, love no longer lived only in the confession, it lived in staying, in showing up, in choosing gentleness over fear. And for them, that was the truest promise of all. The morning that followed began like any other, without ceremony. Pale sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the penthouse, washing the white stone countertops in gold and glinting off the loose strands of Ava's dark hair as she flipped pancakes on a warm skillet. The soft scent of vanilla drifted through the air, blending with the low hum of jazz from the small speaker in the corner. Nathan came up behind her, arms still warm from the coffee he had just made, and wrapped her in a silent embrace. He didn't need words. The way he held her had become their private language, steady and tender. Ava smiled, resting her head briefly against his chest before turning back to the stove. Everything felt simple. There were no contracts signed, no glittering rings, no vows that promised forever. Only two people who once belonged to separate worlds choosing every morning to remain in the same space for one more day. Choosing respect, choosing trust, choosing a love that did not need to be loud to be real. After breakfast, as they sat across from each other at the table, Nathan watched her for a long moment before speaking in a slow, thoughtful tone, as though the words had lived inside him for weeks. "I used to control this city," he said quietly. "Every corner, every move, everything worked the way I wanted. But you, Ava, you're the one thing I don't want to control. I just want to protect." His words tightened something in her chest, not from sentimentality but because she knew he meant every syllable. A man built on power, accustomed to bending reality to his will, had chosen not to strategize, not to dominate, but to simply hold space for her. And that, more than anything, was why she stayed. Life did not always need a perfect plan or a predetermined destination. Sometimes it only required waking each morning and knowing you were living in a way that made your heart feel at peace. Their story was not simply about love, it was about change, about trust, about the quiet strength that lets a person step out of darkness and into light because someone else showed them a gentler way to exist. No one is beyond transformation, not if they have a reason big enough to try. And sometimes that reason does not come from power or wealth, but from an honest gaze, a hand held without condition, and a brave refusal spoken the very first time they met. How did this story make you feel? Did it remind you of someone in your own life? Have you ever stood at a crossroads between controlling something or simply cherishing it? We would truly love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched you, please remember to like the video, share it with someone who might need to hear it today, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more heartfelt, inspiring stories every day. Thank you for spending your precious time with us. Wishing you health, joy, peace, and the warmth of those you love. Goodbye for now, and we'll see you in the next video.